The biggest thing that I want you to take away from today's episode is that truly nothing is wrong with you. And when it comes to overwhelm and it comes to feeling stuck and trapped because you feel afraid and disempowered in these intimidating rooms, it is so important to realize that this isn't happening because something's wrong with you. This is happening because there is a deeper level of psychological work that you have to do to learn to cope with these thoughts and feelings.
Welcome to the Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Art of Speaking Up podcast. I'm so excited you're here. I'm Jess. I'm the host and creator of this show, and I'm also a coach for women who work in the corporate space. If you are wanting to build confidence and develop a really powerful voice as a leader, then this is the podcast for you. And today, I'm going to be helping you move past one of the biggest obstacles that I see keeping people stuck when it comes to speaking up powerfully in a corporate environment. And that obstacle is the obstacle of feeling flooded with overwhelm and worry and anxiety and self-consciousness anytime you are in a room that feels high stakes. If you've ever struggled to speak up in rooms where leaders are present, and if you feel like you're not able to bring the best version of yourself into those rooms, this episode is for you, and you are not alone in that experience. One of the reasons that I started this podcast is because I deeply struggled with feeling self-conscious and overwhelmed anytime I was in a work meeting where there were leaders or executives or just higher level people present in the room. I would feel physically anxious. My muscles would feel really tight. My body would physically shrink back, and I'd be trying to make myself as small as possible. Sometimes my heart would start racing. I'd feel hot. I'd get sweaty. My thoughts would get really jumbled, so it would be really hard to stay present and be focused and concentrate. And because this experience was so overwhelming, it felt impossible for me to jump into a conversation and contribute and share high-level thoughts. That just felt completely impossible for me to do, given how overwhelmed I would feel in those situations. And if you relate to this, or you've ever felt self-conscious or insecure or anxious in rooms where leaders are present, then you know that one of the hardest things about those experiences is the disappointment and frustration that you feel when you walk out of those meetings and you realize that you haven't brought your leadership into the room. That's what was really difficult for me. I was super ambitious. I wanted to be on the fast track for promotion. And when I was starting out my 9-to-5 career in the very beginning, the first formal feedback I ever got was super negative. And I was told unequivocally that I was not on path to promotion because of my presence in meetings. So if you're struggling with this, I would just want you to know that I understand how trapped you can feel in it. And I also want you to know that if you are willing to be patient and committed and fiercely dedicated to working through this obstacle, you can absolutely get past it. After doing the internal psychological work to grow my confidence, I was able to actually feel comfortable in those rooms. I genuinely enjoyed those conversations. I would get excited when executives were in the room because I loved having the higher level business discussions. And it's not only me who went through this transformation, but I have now worked with over 200 women to help them build confidence and bring a stronger voice into the room. And so what I want you to know is that this change is possible for you. And today I'm going to share with you one of the most foundational frameworks that I use when I am coaching my clients to help them get past this feeling of overwhelm so that they can feel confident and capable when it comes to speaking up in the room. I'm going to teach you my framework. I'm going to give you specific tips on how to apply it day to day in the workplace. We have a ton to cover in today's episode, so I'm going to get right into it. The framework that I'm going to be teaching you that is at the center of the entire episode is something called primary versus secondary overwhelm. This is the framework that underlies my coaching philosophy. So when I am coaching my clients to help them build confidence and learn how to show up strong in these rooms, this framework is at the backbone of my coaching. So I'm going to start by teaching you about primary overwhelm, and then I'm going to teach you about secondary overwhelm. Once I've explained both, then I'm going to pivot into giving you 6 pieces of advice to help you work through the overwhelm and bring a confident voice into the room. So first, what is primary overwhelm? Primary overwhelm is the overwhelm that you feel in response to a challenging situation. Now, for purposes of this episode, the challenging situation that we are referring to is a large meeting or a work conversation where there are leaders present and where you feel intimidated. So primary overwhelm is that default feeling of overwhelm that you experience when you're in those situations. Typically, you'll experience a combination of feelings and sensations. So you might experience tightness in your chest. You might experience fear or anxiety. You might feel a sense of self-consciousness. And in addition to those feelings, you also might be experiencing thoughts. So you might have thoughts like, what if I say something stupid? What if I look bad? What if I can't jump into the conversation? What if I embarrass myself? I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not sure how to articulate myself. This situation feels hard. I feel uncomfortable. All of these thoughts are all symptoms of primary overwhelm. So I want you to think of primary overwhelm as the initial psychological response that you have when you are in a room or meeting that intimidates you. Now, let's talk about secondary overwhelm. I want you to think of secondary overwhelm as being completely separate from primary overwhelm. Secondary overwhelm is a second additional layer of overwhelm that you experience in response to the primary overwhelm. So to help you understand this, let's go into an example. You enter into a meeting and you start to feel intimidated. And you start to think to yourself, I don't know what I'm doing. What if I sound stupid? And boom, there's the primary overwhelm. But then something new happens. Secondary overwhelm starts to hit. And you start having thoughts like, oh no, what is happening? What is wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way? Why is this so intense for me? Why am I the one struggling? Why does everyone else find it easy? Why am I still struggling with this? Why isn't this getting easier? Is something broken within me? All of these thoughts represent secondary overwhelm. Secondary overwhelm happens as a result of you judging yourself for feeling the primary overwhelm. And the most important thing to understand about secondary overwhelm is that the secondary overwhelm isn't happening in response to the meeting. It's happening in response to the primary overwhelm, which means at its core, secondary overwhelm is you being overwhelmed by your overwhelm. Now, I know this is really meta, right? And it's a lot to think about, but it's incredibly important to understand because if we aren't aware of the differences between primary and secondary overwhelm, we just experience it as one giant blob of terror where we can't differentiate exactly what is causing what. And this makes it really hard to learn how to digest it and navigate it and move through it. That's why I'm separating them out in this episode, because if you want to be able to have the confidence that helps you show up strong in these rooms, you're going to want to understand the difference between these two types of overwhelm so that you can strategically and thoughtfully learn to navigate through them. Now, one of the easiest ways to conceptualize the difference between primary versus secondary overwhelm is you can think about secondary overwhelm as acting like a magnifying glass or a magnifying mirror that makes the primary overwhelm feel bigger and more intense. So I don't know if you've ever seen those makeup mirrors where when you look in the mirror, it magnifies the size of your face by some huge amount, and you can kind of see like every pore and every little blemish on your face. And you look in one of those mirrors and you're like, whoa, what am I looking at? Oh my gosh, that's my face. Whoa. But anyway, those mirrors will always exaggerate how big your pores are, will exaggerate how your skin is looking. And even if you have like the tiniest blemish on your skin that no one would ever notice, if you look in one of those magnifying mirrors, that blemish will feel huge. So you can think of secondary overwhelm as being kind of like a magnifier or an amplifier. Whatever amount of primary overwhelm you are feeling, the secondary overwhelm is going to act like that magnifying mirror and make it feel bigger. It's going to distort it and make it grow larger within your own psyche. Now, this is really important to know because if you have something within your psychological landscape that is acting like a magnifying mirror, then even situations where you feel just a little bit overwhelmed can escalate really quickly. So if you are experiencing a small amount of overwhelm, secondary overwhelm can make everything feel huge. And if you're experiencing a heavier amount of primary overwhelm, secondary overwhelm can make it feel unbearable. So it acts like a multiplier. And one of the reasons that it has such a potent magnifying impact is because secondary overwhelm is largely rooted in feelings of shame and blame and self-punishment. So typically, the root of the secondary overwhelm comes from thoughts about you being broken, about there being something wrong with you. So you experience that primary overwhelm, and then secondary overwhelm comes in and says, hey, no one else is experiencing this. No one else seems as flustered as you are. There must be something wrong with you. And when you have that thought that there must be something wrong with you, that thought elicits shame. And shame is a very intense and sometimes debilitating emotion. And this is one of the reasons that secondary overwhelm can make the experience feel so big and so intense and so unbearable. Now, the flip side is, and the good news in all of this is, that secondary overwhelm is a really normal human experience. So the irony of all of this is that this feeling of like something's wrong with me, this problem is unique to me, that feeling is such a common and normal human experience, even though by nature it makes you feel alone and isolated. And to build on this direction of optimism that I am taking us in, secondary overwhelm is something that you can work through. And it is some of the most soul-nourishing, rewarding work that I believe you can do across your entire lifetime, because not only does it make you feel less overwhelmed and more confident in the room, but it helps you develop a more loving and respectful relationship with yourself. And that's what the rest of today's episode is going to be about. I want to share 6 pieces of wisdom to help you reduce your experience of overwhelm. And if this framework of primary and secondary overwhelm is resonating with you, then this advice is also probably going to resonate with you very deeply and be very important for your internal growth and your confidence building process. So I'm going to start with the first piece of advice, which is that if you want to feel less overwhelmed and more confident in these rooms and meetings, it's important to tackle the secondary overwhelm first. I talked about how secondary overwhelm acts as a magnifying glass that makes everything feel bigger and harder and scarier, which means that if we don't tackle the magnifying glass, then it's going to be very difficult for us to feel confident in the room, because even tiny experiences of overwhelm and tiny mistakes and tiny slip-ups are going to feel huge in our minds. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to work through the secondary overwhelm so it stops magnifying the primary overwhelm, which brings me into my second piece of advice. So the second thing that I want to share with you is if you want to build confidence and learn how to successfully navigate through these difficult rooms, you have to learn to normalize the experience of primary overwhelm. Part of the reason that secondary overwhelm happens is because we believe that the primary overwhelm is not normal. We believe that the primary overwhelm is happening because something is wrong with us. And as long as we carry the belief that feeling overwhelmed is a sign that we are broken, we will always experience secondary overwhelm, because every time that primary overwhelm pops up, we'll think to ourselves, see, there it is again, this overwhelm. This overwhelm isn't something normal people experience. It's just something I experience. There must be something wrong with me. And then cue the secondary overwhelm and cue the self-blame and the self-criticizing and the self-shaming. So the first belief that you have to work on cultivating, and this is something that I really help my clients do, is you have to cultivate the belief that this is normal. This is a thing that so many people experience. This is something that the executives at your company are experiencing behind closed doors. You might not be seeing it. You might not be up close and personal with it, but as a coach who supports people in the private parts of their professional lives, I can tell you that this is happening behind closed doors, not just to you, but also to people who are highly successful and who really appear to have it all together. And the sooner that you can learn that overwhelm is a normal experience that everybody goes through, the faster you will be able to develop confidence in those rooms. And this brings me into my next piece of advice, which goes hand in hand with the one I just shared, which is you have to learn to offer yourself unconditional self-compassion when you feel overwhelmed. So if you're anything like my clients, then your default response to feeling overwhelmed is to experience secondary overwhelm and to shame yourself and blame yourself, and then as a result, feel more overwhelmed. So a pattern that we fall into is when we feel overwhelmed, instead of responding to it in a way that shrinks it, we respond to it in a way that grows it. And I know this sounds obvious, but if you want to feel less overwhelmed, then when the overwhelm comes on, you have to learn how to shrink it instead of growing it. And one of the best ways that you can shrink overwhelm is to cultivate feelings of internal security and safety. So I think of internal security and safety as being the opposite feeling of overwhelm. Overwhelm feels like I am out of control, I am unsafe, this is unstable. Whereas internal safety and security feels like I am in control. This is safe. I am stable. And when we feel that, the overwhelm starts to shrink. Now, one of the best ways to cultivate an internal sense of stability and safety, even in the face of overwhelm, is to practice self-compassion. Self-compassion is when you treat yourself with love and support and kindness instead of self-blaming and self-shaming and self-punishment. So I want you to think of secondary overwhelm as being like a form of self-punishment. And I want you to think of self-compassion as being the opposite. It's offering yourself support and kindness instead of harsh criticism and harsh self-blaming. Now, when it comes to self-compassion, it can look as simple as saying to yourself, hey, this situation is hard, but I'm here for myself. I have my own back. I will support myself through this situation. Knowing what self-compassion theoretically sounds like within your own mind is typically pretty simple. Where I see people getting stuck and where I really come in and support my clients is in building the awareness that they are allowed to do this. Because for most of the women that I work with and most of the women who are attracted to my work, self-compassion feels very unfamiliar to them. It is not something that they have practiced. They have typically been hard on themselves for many, many years, and their way of operating and creating success in life and in the world is to be really self-punishing. Now, if you relate to this, and if you are also someone who is typically hard on yourself, then self-compassion might not come naturally to you. And you might have to do some inner work to build your awareness that you are allowed to treat yourself well. And you might also have to do inner work to get past the awkwardness and clunkiness that we sometimes experience when we're learning how to pivot from self-punishment to self-compassion. But it is worth it to develop that internal ability because it is such a powerful tool to have in your toolkit to help you shrink the experience of overwhelm so that you can bring a super confident voice into the room. Okay, I have 3 more pieces of advice. This next one is really, really important. So tip number 4 that I want to share is to practice holding and metabolizing overwhelm. The goal isn't to never feel overwhelmed. And I think where people get stuck is that they think that being confident and being a good leader means that you're never overwhelmed. And I really want to clarify that while yes, we want to reduce overwhelm, like we don't want you to be crazy overwhelmed all of the time, I also want to make it clear that part of being a good leader is having the ability to hold and navigate overwhelm. The role of a leader is inherently more overwhelming than a middle management or individual contributor role. Look at the CEO of your company. Do you think that their role is more or less overwhelming than your role? Probably more overwhelming. So what I'd say is that if you want to challenge yourself and grow as a leader, the goal is never going to be to take overwhelm down to 0. The goal is, of course, to shrink overwhelm so it doesn't feel excessive and it doesn't interfere with you doing your job and speaking up powerfully. But the real goal is to learn to hold and metabolize and navigate through overwhelm, to be able to experience some overwhelm and still move forward really effectively. Okay, so that was tip number 4. Tip number 5, this one is huge. Tip number 5 is don't be alone in the experience. So I talked about how secondary overwhelm makes primary overwhelm feel bigger. And the reason it does that is because secondary overwhelm makes you feel ashamed for experiencing primary overwhelm. So shame amplifies overwhelm, and shame tends to thrive in secret. It thrives when you are keeping your experiences private and when you don't have any sort of external support system. So, if you want to feel less overwhelmed and be able to speak up confidently, even in difficult high-stakes rooms, you have to be able to release some of that shame. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to have an external support system. When you have the courage to open up about your experience and share it with other people, you naturally feel less ashamed, because what happens is you open up to people and there's a part of your brain that's thinking everyone's going to reject me and laugh at me for sharing this. But what happens instead is people support you and they say, I've experienced that too. And they tell you that they believe in you, that they actually believe that you can navigate through that experience. And then the shame goes away. And the less shame you experience, the less secondary overwhelm you experience. And then the less secondary overwhelm you experience, the less primary overwhelm you experience. This is why having a support system is irreplaceable. We cannot do deep internal emotional work like this in isolation, because so much of our stuckness is happening because of shame, and so much of our growth happens as a result of letting go of that shame, which we have to do in a support system, in a community, or in a safe relationship. Okay, final tip is you have to treat this as a chipping away process rather than an overnight transformation process. If you expect your overwhelm to dramatically shrink as the result of one podcast episode or one piece of information that you learned, then you're going to feel frustrated by your progress. And when you feel frustrated at your progress, the secondary overwhelm gets louder. And it starts saying, why aren't you growing? You've been working on this. Why is this taking so long? Something truly must be wrong with you. And then that shame grows even bigger and the problem starts to feel worse. Now, the issue here was the expectation that the growth should happen overnight. Typically, learning to shrink and metabolize overwhelm is a gradual process. So if we imagine that the overwhelm you feel is at a level of 100%, you're not going to go from 100% to 0% in a day or even a week. What's more likely going to happen is you're going to go from 100% to 95%, and then you're going to get to 90%, and then it's going to be 85%, and then you might jump down to 75 or 70%. And then you get stuck there for a while, but then you bump down to 65%. And as time goes on, you chip away at it. And then you look back and you think to yourself, oh my gosh, I just stepped out of that meeting and I didn't feel overwhelmed at all. And I barely even noticed because the change has been happening slowly. But I know for sure that me 6 months ago would have been very uncomfortable in that room. And when you zoom out and take that bigger picture view, you're able to see the growth and evolution. So the biggest thing that I want you to take away from today's episode is that truly nothing is wrong with you. And when it comes to overwhelm and it comes to feeling stuck and trapped because you feel afraid and disempowered in these intimidating rooms, it is so important to realize that this isn't happening because something's wrong with you. This is happening because there is a deeper level of psychological work that you have to do to learn to cope with these thoughts and feelings. And this is the real work of leadership, the real work of being a leader. I talked in this episode about how the CEO role is the most overwhelming role in a company. The leaders out there who are truly making a big impact and who are really successful aren't attaining that level of success because they never feel overwhelmed. They're attaining that level of success because they have the internal psychological ability to navigate through those internal emotional challenges. I get so excited about this work because doing this inner work improves every area of your life. You feel freer to speak up more, which means you get to have a bigger impact. You feel less stressed because the ups and downs and the day-to-day challenges of working in a corporate environment don't rattle you as much as they used to. And most important of all, you have a more loving, content, and peaceful relationship with yourself, which I just think is irreplaceable. I think that nothing can replace the feeling of knowing that you genuinely like the person who you are. That is my ultimate definition of confidence. And that is what I have been building for myself over the years. And that is what I help my clients build. The work that I do goes beyond helping you find your voice, beyond helping you attain success in a corporate environment. The work that I'm doing at its core is helping you fall in love with the person who you are, flaws and all. True confidence comes from liking yourself and being so comfortable in your own skin that other people can feel it. If that is the level of confidence that you want to build, I want to invite you to come work with me inside my program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy, where I will help you cultivate a deep sense of internal confidence, and I will teach you the tools that you need to be a confident, impactful voice in the room, even when the stakes are high and the environment feels overwhelming. That is my specialty as a coach. So if you are ready to do that deeper work, I want to invite you to add yourself to the waitlist by clicking the link in the show notes. As soon as you join the waitlist, you will be first to find out when the next cohort of my program is opening for enrollment. The link is in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.